Good day and welcome. Today I am going to talk about The Magic of Recluce, which is a 1991 novel by Modesitt. It is the first book in the Magic of Recluce series, which is currently 20 books. Um, I had read this book for the first time 10 years ago, and I was looking through for lists of books I want to talk about, and I ran across this, and I discovered that I didn't really especially remember a lot about it, so I sat down and reread the book, and overall, my impression is the book is fun to read. It is an enjoyable book. And actually, I was reading through the author's Wikipedia page, and one of the comments the author makes is if you want to keep people beyond the initial read, you have to have depth to the book. Make it, more than something you just read. You have to have morals, a lesson, whatever you want to call it, in there. But your first job is to make a book that the readers want to read. Because if readers don't enjoy reading your book, um, they're not going to finish reading it, and so they're not going to get to the lesson, which really is a insight that aligns with what I try to get out of books. The most important thing is to make a good book that's enjoyable to read, which the author has done. And then if you're going to have the lesson teach some, have the book teach something about morality, that's what's going to really bring readers back to the book, is that there's more depth to it than just a good story. And a lot of books I enjoy reading fit the bill. There is, something more to them than being a quick read. The Belgarian is an exception. It's a book that's really fun to read, and I really enjoy going back to it again and again, even if there's not a deep lesson. Anyway, Magic of Recluse. Okay, it's a good book to read. Are there things that I disagree with? Yeah, I don't know. Disagree is kind of a strong word. The main character of the first book, for example, um, is kind of annoying, but it's also a teenage boy who wants simple answers to complex questions which don't exist, and doesn't feel like putting in the time and energy to gain the understanding to understand the complexities of these complex questions that he's asking. He just wants to ask a question, well, why does this work? And someone says, oh, here's why. Um, Generally, when you're dealing with real world things, why does this work? Well, it's complicated. Well, I don't want complicated. Well, tough. The answer is complicated. So, is this a convincing character? Do I believe that, teenagers maybe don't want to go through and absorb things in depth? Yeah, I find that completely believable. Do I like a character that is just constantly asking why, and wants things spoon fed to him? No, I don't really, but it's not bad enough that I couldn't read the book anymore. I enjoyed reading the book. And then the other thing, which I think is kind of an innovative approach in these books, at least in this first book, is the characters plunged into a world with a lot of complexity. And normally, when you get into a situation where there's a lot of complexity, your basic high fantasy, your epic fantasy types of novels, um, the reader discovers the complexity along with the narrator or protagonist of the story, um, and you're only exposed to as much complexity as you need to understand. And it's not like the protagonist gets into a situation where they don't really know what's going on, and they kind of wing it, and all of a sudden bad things start happening to them. Um, Neil Gaiman stories do that all the time, where the protagonist is, ushered into the world of the fairies, where there's these huge, complicated rules, and the protagonist doesn't know anything about them. There's not an explicit guide, and they end up, the whole rest of the plot of the story ends up being driven by them doing something they didn't realize is a violation of the rules, and it's a violation of the rules, and now they have to spend the whole rest of the story fixing it. I find those very difficult to read. But on the other hand, is it convincing where a character doesn't understand the complexity of the world and they kind of go in and kind of wing it and end up over their head and end up having to deal with consequences of things that happen to them? It's actually, yeah, it is. Not no None of us, or I don't know, maybe you do, but I never really had a guide who explained things to me. I just kind of did what seemed right at the time, and sometimes it turned out for the best, sometimes it did not turn out for the best, and I've learned. So in that sense, the character is also convincing. The author doesn't do these complex info dumps, explaining all of the politics of what's going on, and then the character can make the informed decision about things. The character, can wing it. And like I said, there are times when that gets done, and it gets done kind of in a way that I find difficult to read, but not a problem with this book. The character was in over their head. It was a very complex world, and they were just trying to make their way through it, and they ended up doing well, obviously. But yeah, there were struggles along the way. So that was, again, it's a convincing read. Is it the most fun read I've ever had? Well, no, not really, because you know it's very difficult when a character is taken out of a situation and put into a new one and doesn't really know what's going on. The author's then confronted with, well, do I want to do mass info dumps to help the character along, or do I just kind of let the character wing it and drive the story from there? And it's hard to do well, but I think this book does it well. As mentioned, this is currently a 20 book series, and I've read through 6 of them, and I found, uh, sometimes the plots can get a little bit repetitive. Um, and since I haven't reread the next 5 books, I don't really have much insight into what I found repetitive about them. I just remember 10 years ago, a friend of mine recommended the book. I read it, and I'm like, oh, this is a fun book. I'll read the next one. And I did. And I did that again. And at the end of the 6th book, I'm like, well, these have all been fun, but this is starting to feel a little repetitive. So I'm just going to stop for now. 10 years later, I come back to the book and I'm like, well, yeah, that was a fun book. I enjoyed reading it, and I can see why I read 6 books. And I have this, vague memory of why I stopped, but overall, definitely worth my time. So that's it. And once again, I appreciate you listening this far, and I will talk to you again later.